I think the numbers have started to settle down, hopefully. So I'll make a start. So hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar on water company assurance and the reporter role for AMP8. This is hosted by CIWEM Central Southern branch. My name is Emma Everard. I'm the chair of that branch and I will be chairing today's session. So to start off, I'll just give a quick bit of housekeeping and some information on CIWEM and upcoming events. I'll then introduce our speaker today, Julian Jacobs, and I'll hand over to him. So just to mention also, I'll be supported today by Barbara Woods, who's from CIWEM, and she'll be pasting various links into the chat as we go on. So in terms of general housekeeping, this event will be recorded and it should be available on the CIWEM website within a few weeks. You can also view past webinars on that channel. If you have, as it says on screen, if you have any technical issues, please use the chat facility within Zoom. But for the actual presentation, we're trying to take questions at the end, and please can you use the Q&A facility. If you type your questions in there, I will then read them out to Julian at the end of the talk. I think that's probably about this. If you go to the next slide, please, Julian. Yes, so just for those who are not familiar with CIWEM, it's a Royal Chartered Professional Body and independent charity. There's a few links on the screen there to their websites, to the vision, strategy, and also details of the membership page. Just to sort of advise everybody, CIWEM's vision is quite a nice sentence, really. Their vision is a world in which professionalism and excellence build connections to inspire widespread, impactful water and environmental solutions. So I think we can all sign up to that. Just to also flag that CIWEM has a number of policy reports on their website, and one in particular is relevant to today's, which is a freshwater future. This is an independent review of the water sector performance and governance, and also gives a sort of future view on water management in the UK. That's been launched in Parliament, and you can download and view that from the CIWEM website. Finally, just to say that we do have a number of other events through the year from the CIWEM Central Southern branch, and there's a link on screen, and Barbara will be posting into the chat to our next event, which is actually coming up quite soon in July, and that is looking at sustainable drainage systems, and in particular the sort of latest tools that are being developed. So next slide, please, Julian. Great. And I'll just leave you to look at this final slide whilst I introduce Julian. So Julian is a colleague of mine at Atkins Realis. He is the regulations director of our water management consultancy team, and he manages the regulation and assurance business. So Julian, I know Julian quite well. He's actually got over 25 years experience across quite a lot of different sectors, and he's got a great background, a range of skills, which I'm sure he will tell you more about shortly. He's an experienced auditor. So if you work in the reporting side in any of the water companies, I'm sure you will have come across him or one of the team. In addition to working with UK water companies, Julian also does a lot of work with other clients, including the World Bank and regulators in other countries. So not just the UK, he also works in Australia and the Middle East. So without further ado, I will hand over to Julian and let him deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. Okay. So we've named it Paying the Check, Water Company Assurance and How the Reporter Role Has Evolved for AMP8. And this is the agenda. I'm going to try and get through about 13 different areas and leave some time at the end for Q&A. So a little bit more, and thank you, Emma, for the introduction. Oh, actually, I have got my favourite quote first. So the reason I love this quote is that it's associated with both the water sector, but also the specific work we do around audit. It's also a little bit pejorative, which is kind of why I like it, because actually there's a bit of a stereotype that no one really welcomes auditors, that we're you know, it's a necessary evil. But I think actually not that I'd like to think, I'm aware over the last 18 years of doing this, actually our clients and the regulators really value it. They see the value that it adds, and therefore that kind of a bit nasty quote, I'd like to say that's not representative of the work that goes on in the water industry with ourselves and our other counterparts. So a little bit more about me. I am a bit unusual in Atkins Realis because I haven't yet found anyone who has a first degree in politics and French working in the kind of engineering world. And I worked for 10 years in the charity sector, a range of UK charities and then overseas in South America. I then did a master's in water management, where I specialised in kind of management of and regulation of water utilities. So that then helped me to kind of move into the sector, and I joined, I have to say, against the advice of my professor, who said you should go and get a good grounding in a water company. But I was very excited by the opportunity in a consultancy where you get to work with many different clients. One thing I didn't expect when I joined was that I'd be spending quite a lot of my time auditing. It wasn't something that crossed my mind. I don't think I would have been aware of it. And it really is a great experience in that we get to see lots of different water companies at close quarters in the UK, internationally. We get to see some very, very good, but also we actually get to see some pretty bad. But I won't be talking about that today. The areas I audit, so we have up to teams of about 20 for a water and sewerage company, because they do so much. But my kind of areas that I cover are around the customer service, very much because of the time when I worked in the charity world. We called them donors, but it's very similar, the principles to customer management. Developer services, I've also audited water quality, supply interruptions, low pressure, all the reporting around properties and population, a little bit of water resources, but I don't have Emma's background on that. And then I have security clearance, so I've also always been involved on the security and emergency preparedness that water companies have to do, and then around business plan investments. I've transferred those skills from water to energy and recently to highways projects too. And externally, apart from being chartered with CIWEM, I'm the convener of British Water's Policy and Regulation Group, and I'm also involved with the IWA that is bringing everyone together next year for the Congress in Glasgow. So I'm starting off with a little quiz. Obviously, I can't get you to come back with the answers, but you can look at them and decide what you would think would be the correct one. So in terms of what do we do? Well, obviously I'm going to present a lot more on this, but does technical audit involve an assessment of the methodology, the internal systems of checks and control? Do we look at the reliability, accuracy and completeness of data, or all of the above? Well, the answer is all three of those above. That when we go and do our audit and assurance, it's to cover everything that around their approach, how they have internal checks before we come in, and then obviously the actual reliability of the reporting. External audit and assurance in the water industry, is it a legal obligation, a requirement of the regulators? Is it voluntary, or none of the above? Well, this one's a little bit of a trick question, in that actually for the period we've just had and for the lot since 2012 to 2025, it's actually been voluntary to have external audit. Often regulators require assurance, but that could be internal audit, or the board of the water companies. It didn't have to be external. But for AMP8 from 2025 to 2030 period, Ofwat is bringing it back for some areas, and for other areas it isn't required, and I'll touch on that more later. So in our reports, are we giving our judgment, our opinion? Are we guaranteeing the correctness of the reporting, or are we providing summaries of the true state of affairs? Well, the answer is actually B. We are in this role doing technical audit through our kind of expertise, our experience, and we provide our professional opinion. So before we come along, water companies, you would expect to have internal checks and controls in place, and where they do, can that, if they're working effectively, can that reduce the liability of the auditor, the work of an auditor, the auditor's responsibilities, or none of the above? Well, the answer is actually, if we're satisfied that they've got very robust internal checks and controls, it reduces our work. We don't need to check as much. We might check their checks to confirm we're satisfied they are effective, but that's why that's really important. And lastly, did we identify the following during an audit? This is a true or false. A company paying its customers £20 when the customer failed to be at home for the appointment. So this is actually true. Obviously, I'm not going to mention the water company concerned, but the team had a bit of a misunderstanding. So there's actually a legal obligation where the water company fails to attend or arrives very late for the appointment, that a payment of £20 is made to the customer. And actually these values are going up now under the legislation. But in this case, they got it a bit wrong, and when they turned up and the customer wasn't there, they were sending the customers £20 checks. So obviously when we identified that as the audit, they stopped doing that. Okay, so now I want to get into the kind of why regulate. So really important part is you need robust and reliable information. It's the cornerstone of both sound regulation, but also good business decision making. And the regulators, they measure a huge array of activities to make sure that water companies are meeting their regulatory and legal obligations. So for AMP8, there's performance commitments. There's something new called price control deliverables, which are around outputs. There's lots of other asset, operational, customer, financial data, and this covers every area of the business. So that's water, wastewater, water resources, the tariffs, bioresources, and then customer and developer services. So, and I think I've got them all illustrated on the right. So there's also other areas I've mentioned before, the security and emergency side. There's drainage water management plans, water resource management plans, and then there's all the rapid gated schemes that anyone involved on strategic water resources will be aware of. So there's a lot out there. So I've said why we regulate, so why do we audit? Well, I like to claim that, well, I wish we weren't so invisible, but we are the largely invisible guardians of the water industry. But at least for those here today, we won't be so invisible after this. So we perform the audits to ascertain the validity and reliability of the information and data that the water companies publish and submit to the regulators. So we're looking at what they should be doing and checking if they are doing it. And as I mentioned before around internal checks and controls, we're not their first or only line of defence. They have operational and management checks and controls. Maybe they have internal audit, but we're typically their what's called their last line of defence. So our job, what's expected of us, is that we're going to identify errors, weaknesses, and omissions, as well as confirming that generally the submissions are of high quality and robust. important part of the process is, I mean, there's no point in us identifying things if nothing then happens. So the water companies then have the opportunity to take action to address the findings. And what I've got down at the bottom, I haven't been able to add this year's because we haven't quite finished this year's annual audits, but you can see at 3 companies the amount of issues we identify and errors, and it just gives you an idea of the kind of numbers. And it isn't that the purple company is so much worse. It's actually because the companies A and B are water-only companies, whereas company C is a water and sewerage company. They have to report a lot more, probably about 40% more. So as they report more, we find more issues and errors. And then we report back our findings to the senior management, and then ultimately we have to go in front of either the audit committee or the board. And our job is to generally, hopefully, give them comfort that the submissions that they need to sign off are robust, and they shouldn't have concerns. And normally by the time we get to that stage, any issues, any errors have been resolved. So a little bit more about the background in the UK. The role of kind of technical audit used to be called the reporter. That was, I don't know the history that far back of how or why it got that name, but it was first mandated by Ofwat in 1989. So I would have been at school back then, long before my time. It covered business plans, the investments, the in-year annual performance reporting, looking at the tariffs, and also then there's kind of ad hoc areas that they would pick up and decide. So actually Ofwat abolished the role in 2012 because there were various reviews going on at the time, and it was determined that the industry was mature enough and didn't require this hands-on scrutiny. But the English and Welsh water companies actually have all voluntarily retained some form of independent assurance. So while we were not working directly for the regulator, us and our counterparts have carried on doing this role, but just internally for the water companies. The kind of old style role working for the regulator exists now, always has done in Scotland for Wicks, and in Northern Ireland for the regulator there. So it's not just associated with private water companies, it exists with other forms of public ownership as well. So actually we've gone full circle in England and Wales because of the huge amount of additional expenditure over the next 5 years. Ofwat is introducing more scrutiny. So in some ways they're kind of bringing us back. It's not going to be in the same shape and form as in the past, but we will have what they're referring to as an actionable duty of care for Ofwat on certain areas, and I've listed. So it's not all the reporting of water companies, but it's these key areas where it's what's called enhancement expenditure. And on the right, and I've got a whole load of links at the end, there's a whole report where it's set out what we'll be doing. And actually, I think it's been very collaborative. So all the assurance providers had a workshop with Ofwat back in March, and there's still ongoing dialogue. So it's not that we're just simply told you'll do this and it will work like this. It's very much working out how it's going to work most effectively for the regulator over the next 5 years. And as Emma mentioned, I occasionally get to work overseas. This model that really developed in the UK is recognised internationally, especially in English-speaking countries or those with ties to the UK. So there's 6 states in Australia that bring in consultants to look at performance and price reviews, and we've been very active out there. In Abu Dhabi, the regulator uses third-party scrutiny when they have their price reviews. In Saudi Arabia, they have management contracts, so they've brought in the private sector across 6 regions, and we are the technical auditors, independent auditors for Riyadh. In the Philippines, Manila has 2 water companies, and their concessions, they use a technical auditor. And then we've had one-off commissions around the world, and particularly World Bank in Kenya and Tanzania in the past. So there are different types of auditing, and really it depends what the objective is. So you do compliance auditing, where you're looking at whether there's adherence to the policies, procedures. So you're looking at the transactions, verifying they're following the rules, essentially. There's what's called systems-based auditing, where you're following through, if it's water quality, the kind of water quality sample manager, or if it's customer service, the CRM and billing systems, and you're checking the processes there are doing what they should do, they're fit for purpose. And then, mainly because we have limited time, we're not forensically auditing, we have to take a risk-based approach, look at where we think the biggest risks are. So there's risk-based auditing. In practice, when we do audit, we use a combination. So we might use 2 or often all 3 approaches to be able to fully assess what we need to. So how do we do it? Well, our job is to expose, examine and challenge assumptions, processes and data. And I particularly want to pick up on assumptions, because I think when I started this work back in 2007, I probably didn't realise how many assumptions I made in life, and definitely not at work. And actually, water companies all the time make assumptions that it's then built into their decisions and their reporting, and we have to go and scrutinise them and see, are they reasonable? Often they are, sometimes they're not, and we have to say, well, you need to update it, and that can change considerably, impact on the data. Sometimes assumptions are used when there's actually real data, and you shouldn't be making assumptions as well. Where we're identifying issues or mistakes, we then have to look at it and work out, well, was this an ad hoc error? Is it a one-off? Or is it a systemic problem built into the process? And while that may not mean that the matter is less or more important, what it impacts on is what you need to do to resolve it. Clearly, it's a very different solution you need if it's systemic, if it's built into the entire process, compared with this, it's a one-off, potentially human error. We then have to report back our findings, and we would often report them back first to the individuals we've audited, but ultimately they get reported higher up and then eventually externally. We're making recommendations, conclusions. While we give our opinions need to be supported by evidence from the audit process. It's not just because we think something; it has to be based on the evidence we've uncovered. And a really important word for us, which I'm not sure if you'd be familiar with, is around materiality, because some things are errors, but they really don't matter. They're very small, they're insignificant, they're not actually having an impact. We might still say they should be corrected, but it's the really big issues where it's really affecting. It's got high materiality. That's where it becomes very important. And our reports, it really varies. Sometimes maybe it's one audience. Often it's multiple stakeholders. So the example of the report, which Affinity Water publish every year, our reports on their website, that goes within the company to their executives, that goes to the board, it goes to the regulator, but then other stakeholders, maybe their customer forum, customer challenge group, and ultimately the customers can see it on the website. So we have to make sure when we write it up, it's in a format that is accessible to all those audiences. So I'm often asked, is there a kind of personality that you need to be an auditor? And we've got some of our auditors there, past and present. And so the question is, what do those people have in common? And is there a personality type required to make a successful auditor? Well, I think the answer to the first question is for these people have very little in common, very diverse group. The answer to the second question is they probably need to have an inquisitive mind and the courage to explore, investigate, and to speak up. Having said that, while there may not be a personality type, there are definitely some skills which make a successful auditor. And I'm going to go through a few of those. So some basic requirements. Well, we think people need to have good interviewing skills. It's really important, the human factor when you're with people, managing that aspect alongside having a really good technical understanding of the area that you're auditing. You need to have excellent analytical skills. So I don't know if you know the expression to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's really knowing what's really important and what you can discount or ignore. Funny one, but especially if you're in an audit that might last all day, you need to be really good at taking notes, so that obviously you're capturing the right information, and then you can go back and look at it, write it up, know which areas you want to follow up on. I'd like to take notes on my laptop while I'm typing along during the audits. Some of my colleagues like pen and paper. It doesn't really matter how, as long as you capture. We tend not to record them because we don't want to put people ill at ease. So, I mean, that wouldn't matter if we recorded them. But and then lastly, as I mentioned before, because we're giving our opinion, where we give that opinion, it needs to be traced back to evidence that we've had presented to us or we've uncovered. So I've got a few more pointers. That really this was from the team feeding in. So we need to keep our eyes open. I have a couple of photos of my former regulation director, Jonathan, who is a great believer in body language, facial expressions. Sometimes you don't need to say anything. You can just look surprised or look a bit concerned, and people will take it as a cue that they need to provide a bit more information. We need to be flexible. We don't know what we're going to see, whether it's all going to be ready. Maybe things have to be provided later. Maybe people are not well, had a bad day. We just need to be flexible to kind of the needs and the situation. And connected to that, we really need to support people, because not everyone wants to be in the audit. Some are nervous, and we need to support them on that. I've said it tongue in cheek, but we for people who aren't being very cooperative, who might try and pull the wool over our eyes, essentially we mustn't give up. We need to be strong, firm as well, because we need to try and get to the bottom of situations. We obviously write what we think, but wherever possible, we're trying to build consensus with the auditees for our findings. It's obviously much better if they agree with our findings. Occasionally it won't be the case, but really, it's really key for us, if we can, to build that consensus. We give praise where it's due, and have that's really important. I always say we're not there to look by. It's not by exception. It's not that we're only covering the bad. We want to highlight and praise where things are really good. And now I move on. We always ask our team to give their tips, and I think I have a list of about 30. But for today, I've narrowed it down to a top 5 audit tips from our team. So I think everyone would agree. Preparation is hugely important. We'll be sent data, we'll be sent information about the processes and other things in advance. We need to scrutinise that, decide what we want to follow up, questions, because generally we don't have very long face-to-face with auditees. I think shortest audits, maybe half an hour. I think our longest audits, things like customer service and leakage, might last a couple of days. But most is kind of somewhere more in the kind of hours or a day. we always say to the team, don't be scared of asking daft questions. In fact, there's not a daft question, there's only daft answers. We need to listen to what is said and how it's said, and really has it answered the question. And if it hasn't, we need to possibly try and rephrase it, ask it in a different way. But clearly we want to try and get a sensible, logical response to the questions we're posing. I think virtually every auditor will say they've heard over the years when we say this looks odd or this doesn't look right. We're often told, but this is the way we've always done it. And yes, well, that may be the case, but that doesn't make it correct or compliant. And really the last one, it's very much about the detail. Whatever the subject area, whether that's water resources, whether it's CSOs, customer complaints, yeah, we need to look at the detail, really understand it. So I've just got a slide here, I've called it Keeping It Fresh. So in our experience, really, we're there to add value. We want to provide assurance feedback that makes a difference, that strengthens the water company's submissions. We need to make sure that what we're doing is relevant and it's focused on risks. And we need to adapt. There's plenty of change going on. I mean, apart from all the new rules that the regulators bring in every 5 years, we've got the Cunliffe Commission, and that's going to again be changing the kind of framework we all work in. And then, so moving into the future, we need to improve how we identify and manage that risk. We need to look at applying digital support tools where we think it's appropriate, and obviously there's a real buzz around AI and the potential. And then we need to help stakeholders to understand about the reliability of data, where they can have really good confidence and where maybe it's not so strong. And a really important part of our role is really to help the water companies generally, but also sometimes the regulators, is to improve the trust in the sector, which has obviously taken a bit of a bashing over the kind of recent past. I think that's the end of my slides, the presentation. I've added a whole load of useful links, which I believe get posted in, is it I think the chat, Emma, or rather than the Q&A. So and also the copy of the presentation will be available afterwards, and actually just to take you through them. So what you have there are links around the new assurance requirements for anyone working in the water industry in England and Wales that Ofwat have brought in. We're just a little bit too early for this year's annual reporting. It won't be published till mid-July, but that's a link to the last report, the most recent report from Ofwat for last year's performance. And then I've covered also equivalents for the Environment Agency, the Drinking Water Inspectorate. And if you aren't familiar with it, there's a great website called Discover Water, which all the water companies contribute all their data to, and it's a really great kind of visual representation of performance in a really accessible way. And then lastly, the picture I showed earlier of an example of one of our assurance reports. I put a link there. So I do believe, yes, that's the end of my presentation.
Great. Thanks very much, Julian. Really interesting talk there, and good insight into the role of the auditor. We have had a few questions, so I will try reading them out to you. So the couple of them have been sort of upvoted, so I'll start with them first. From Simon Hawkins, what impact do you believe the Cunliffe review will have? There's mention of Ofwat having a more supervisory role, implying there may be more detailed and hands-on approach in future. That is the question, and,
yes.
And in fact somebody else has posted a comment that you'd already mentioned that supervisory regulation was already being undertaken.
Wow, I'd love to have a crystal ball. So if I'm really honest, I'm not sure. And we have the draft of the kind of review, but there'll be a lot more detail coming out. I definitely think that there's going to be quite a lot of change. I think the real question will be is how quick, because we've just had a price review. Really, the process formally is set for the next 5 years, and I'm not sure I expect that to be overturned or anything radical happen. I know some other people have said no, they do think maybe some of that will be changed. So I think there will be change, probably quite a lot, but I'm not sure it will be necessarily in this AMP. Also, I think what's really good about the Cunliffe review is it's not as narrow as the water companies. It's looking at the whole kind of water framework, the wider operating environment that affect. So I think it will look at other things beyond. And then as for the kind of supervision role, it's really interesting because the rest of the world borrowed a lot from us, particularly Middle East and Australia, but actually their regulators do take a much more supervisory role. So it might be that them having learnt from us, we're now going to go and look more, how's it done in Australia, how's it done in parts of the Middle East, because it's a lot more hands-off. It doesn't go into the kind of huge detail that the kind of current framework here does. So I think there are good lessons from overseas. I do think sometimes it is far too complex. I mean, it gives us a lot of work, but it doesn't mean I necessarily agree with all the complexity. I think there is definitely room for things to be simplified, and I think it's really important wherever possible to engage stakeholders, engage customers around these processes, and that they understand it, but also can be involved in identifying priorities. So I've tried to answer the best I can without having a crystal ball.
Thanks, Julian. So the next question is it's actually been asked by two people in different ways, but have you come across clients that refuse to make any adjustments after you've had perhaps negative audit outcomes, and what are the next steps in these cases?
Okay, well, obviously we do sometimes find some big issues, and sometimes there can be a little bit of friction, I think is probably the politest way. And there's different levels. So first of all, there's the people we audit face to face, there's the auditees. As I mentioned, we do try and build consensus. They don't always agree with our findings. Our first port of call would be their regulation team. They will understand the regulatory side, and as we do, kind of the rules of the game, and therefore they're kind of very good to adjudicate. And in most cases, they will agree with us, and therefore, yes, our findings will be taken on board, agreed, and addressed. Sometimes, occasionally, they may not agree with us, or some of the people on the operational side may not. And yes, we go through a process. That's why the whole kind of audit process is allowed for up to 2 months to work our way through those issues and problems. And I would say almost always they're resolved, or where they're not resolved. So we don't change our opinion unless it's demonstrated we were wrong, which again, occasionally we can be. But if there's a big difference of opinion, which I will add again is very rare, essentially the company will expose that to the regulator. So we will give our view, they will give their view. We wouldn't change our mind, we wouldn't agree with theirs. Where there is at the end a difference of opinion, they need to be exposed, and then it's up to the regulator to decide, really. So that's how we would deal with it.
Okay, great, thank you. Now I've got a bit more of a specific question here. Could you please briefly explain what an audit on low pressure would entail? Would it be reviewing water companies' response to low pressure reports with follow-up times, response times and follow-ups, or what type of thing would you be looking at?
Okay, so I have audited pressure before, not that recently, but I'll draw back from my memory bank. But actually, a lot of these principles would cover many different areas. So first of all, we would look at what are the company's processes for identifying pressure issues at properties. And then we would also look at the systems. How is it captured? Is it captured and reported correctly? And the two big ways for pressure would be either customer contacts. So that would be through looking at the CRM system, where it would record whether it was email, it might be on social media. The biggest contact channel is telephone. So looking at those contacts, seeing then what happens, how are they investigated. And then the other way that the companies will be identifying low pressure issues is they have thousands of loggers out. Some companies have 100% coverage, some have more like 70, 80% coverage, but it is those loggers. And actually, if they have a customer contact, they'll often then go and put a logger there if they didn't have one. So having looked at the processes, if we agree they are fit for purpose, then we're actually digging into the data. And what we would do is we take a sample. It may be a random sample, or we may think there's maybe a certain part of the region or a certain type that there may be bigger risk is not being reported accurately, and we will go and check all the records. And so that will be, again, it could be looking at the customer contacts, it will be looking on the logger data, and we will want to make sure that we can see from the logger data then that comes through into the reports that are presented to us. And ultimately for low pressure, the water companies are either reporting the number of properties, or they report properties per 10,000 customers. So essentially we follow the audit trail from the number at the end all the way back to the original sources of data. So that's how we audit it. It's actually what's called a bespoke performance commitment. So it's not one that every water company has to report on for the last 5 years. I think from memory, 12 of the 16 water companies report on low pressure.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Julian. Now, different tangent here. Back to the skills of people doing it. Do companies or people who do audits have to be approved by some kind of formal process or professional body? And the question is, what is stopping anyone kind of coming along and doing an audit or undercutting rates that other companies might be
Okay, well, I probably won't comment on the last bit, but in terms of there is a chartered institute for internal auditors, and yes, you can get chartered, you can do exams, there's qualifications around that, but actually the skills of a technical auditor are a little bit different. And actually, often I'm asked, are we accountants? Because people think of financial auditors. So there is a lot of training available, but no, it's not a kind of formal, recognised profession in the way that internal audit or financial audit is. Having said that, I would expect the same at our counterparts. They provide training to the people that are doing auditing. We definitely do. And therefore, yes, we don't just throw in anyone, just say, go off and audit this. But it's not a formal qualification. Ofwat are actually asking for now for AMP8 for the new assurance requirements, where we have this duty of care. They ask for evidence that the people doing the audits have the appropriate skills and experience. So yes, as part of when we submit the reports, we need to submit CVs of the people doing it. But there isn't a kind of magic qualification. What there are various assurance and audit standards that exist out there, and we make sure that we adhere to the kind of good practice in those standards. But again, they're not accredited. We don't need to seek accreditation, but we follow the good practice.
Okay, thank you. Just to say, there are currently 7 questions left, so I think I'll just work through them. But if we don't have time to answer them all in this session, I'm sure we can provide answers afterwards. So the next question I have is perhaps a quicker one. From start to finish, how long does an audit take for an annual performance review on average?
Okay,
Probably quite pertinent at this time of year.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, but I think I kind of alluded to it before. It really depends what we're auditing. So there are some things like there are customer surveys done, and that will be done by a market research company, and they're accredited, and they will be following kind of market research good practice. And really all we're doing there is making sure they transcribe correctly the values from the report, the scores they get into the Ofwat tables. So that might take 15 minutes, half an hour. You wouldn't even need a face-to-face audit. Then you have things like auditing complaints. You might need 2 days for that. Leakage, 2 or 3 days. And that's the actual face-to-face time I'm talking about. You would need all your time to prepare, and then you need time to close off any issues identified and write up the findings. I think very roughly, the quickest audits then in total maybe an hour, hour and a half, and then the longest maybe something like 5-6 days. It's kind of that huge variance. It really depends what the subject matter is. So sorry, not so quick an answer.
Okay, thanks, Julian. We've got a couple now about sort of being an auditor. The first one, I'm not entirely sure what, I think it's from someone called Mila, what they mean. It says, I'm new to this industry. What is the first thing I need to learn? And what is the most basic knowledge I need to have? I presume she's asking about, I'm new to the auditing role.
Okay, well, I think, well, it depends which part you're in, because if you're in the water company and you're preparing reporting, you would expect your regulation team to help prepare you to be audited, and they would be there to support the individuals who do the reporting, and so it's not all a surprise, and to actually understand what we need to see. If you work for one of the many consultancies out there that do the technical audit, often, so in our company, we are a very small part of a much bigger company. So I'm always looking for people who obviously have their technical specialism, who are then interested in doing the audit and assurance work. So if you're in our company or one of our counterparts, you need to seek out the business, the team that do this assurance work, and really go and express some interest, saying, I'm an expert in water resource. I'd love to go in and do some of the auditing and take it from there.
Great, thanks, Julian. And we have another one on a similar theme from Lydia, who says, I'm fairly new to this, but she's saying, does it fall within the auditor's role to suggest remedial strategies or work with companies on these, or is it actually up to the company to go away and come back with their remedial strategies following the audit?
I think it's a great question, and I think different auditors would probably give you a different response. I think where we have seen good practice, we've got our own experience and skills, we can make suggestions, we can give pointers. So yes, I think we should be helping, not say go off and try and figure it out where it's obvious. So that's part of, I think you'd say, the kind of added value based on our experience and skills. What we're not there to do is go and do it for them. We're not doing consultancy. We're not there to kind of then be an extension and do the work. But yeah, I think we should help them identify what remedial action needs to be taken, but then it's the onus is on the company to go and do the work.
Great, thanks, Julian. So there's a good question here for you. If you had the power to change only one thing in the water company assurance space, what would that be and why?
Oh, That is a great question. I'm very proud that the clients we work with publish our reports, so there's full visibility and transparency. Not all the water companies and all the water companies around the world do make all of this publicly available. So I think that would be great. That would allow other stakeholders, customers, where regulators don't get to see it, so that there's more openness around what we're finding. And I think that would be a positive cultural change. One thing I would say in England and Wales is our water companies, I think, are some of the most transparent in the world. Obviously, hugely encouraged by our regulators who ask them to publish so much. But the reason we know about so many of the problems is because there's more information here than you find in many other parts of the world. So I think that's something really positive. But then you need to be sure you can rely on the data, that it's accurate.
Mm. Thanks, Julian. You've inadvertently answered another question. I'll just read it to you in case there's anything you want to add. Somebody's asked, do you make the outcomes of your audits publicly available? Well, you've just answered that.
Well, it's not our decision. Yes, ultimately it's the clients, or if they're water companies, or the regulator. So again, in Australia, all the states where we've worked, everything is made publicly available as well. Whereas in the Middle East, I'm not aware ever of any of our findings, any of our reports are made publicly available. So yeah, it does vary.
Okay, and the sort of follow-on bit of us, does it actually depend on the area of work you're looking at being audited? And also there's a question sort of, can you make audit reports available to the Environment Agency as well as Ofwat? My understanding is they're just available on the website, and so anybody can look at them.
Yeah, and then some water companies will be sharing with the regulators where it's required, the audit reports, yes. And then some of them choose to publish on their website and then make it available to everyone. So I think it varies depending on whether the regulators require it, and then whether the water companies choose to make them available.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've just got one final question. Has any audit you have done contradicted a regulator's audit of a company, or is there normally agreement, between yours and the regulator's view?
Well, I think probably with the exception of the DWI, who have auditors they send in, I don't believe that would appear in that the EA and the Ofwat wouldn't send in their own auditors. They rely on us, hence why now they're giving us this duty of care, and we have minimum requirements we have to fulfill. So that wouldn't really happen. What we sometimes do is we have different interpretations of the guidance, or we say the guidance isn't clear, and then we would try and engage with the regulators to because yeah, you need to have clarity and not different interpretations, obviously. So I wouldn't say we necessarily always agree with everything that they publish in terms of guidance and rules, but no, we wouldn't have alternative audits happening.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That is actually the end of the questions that we've got, and it's in perfect time. So it just remains to say thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar today. We hope you found it interesting. And yeah, we hope you will see you again for a further webinar on different topics. We have on screen now a variety of links of upcoming CIWEM events, and these are all on the CIWEM events page, and they are also in the webinar chat. So please feel free to browse through those. And yes, thank you very much to Julian for his presentation today, and we hope you all have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everyone.